Rock and hard spots hold bass all year, but in cold water, they're at their peak. The catch? Most anglers fish the wrong ones. If you don't know what to look for, you'll waste hours on dead water. Stick with me, I'll show you how to find the sweet spots fast. In my mind, anytime the water gets cold, and I'm talking about 55 degrees and colder, in a lot of lakes, that's about a third to 40% of the year, rock and hard spots, that hard cover really plays. It's amazing how good it gets. In some lakes, there's too much of it. I go to some of those Ozark lakes, the whole thing is rock. Other lowland places, some people think there's no rock, but there's actually shell beds and hard spots, and there's always man-made riprap and boat ramps, old foundations. There's a number of different things that you can look at that I consider rock or hard spots, and they'll play. But the thing is, they're not all created equal. If there's a lot of it, you have to decide which of it's good. When there's not much of it, you have to figure out what the right stuff is, how to find it. And then also, a lot of time, it's not just the rock itself. It's where it's at, it's the depth, how it lays out. And then once you find it, what are the lures that work? Let me dive in, help you simplify, point out the type rock for your lake that you're looking for, varying by the type of lake, what to look for, and then some lures that always work there. Now let's start off with lakes that have quite a bit of rock in them. So we're talking more like the ones that are mountainous or just more rocky areas. So anytime you get in Tennessee and Kentucky and Alabama over to Virginia, a lot of those lakes are more, Missouri and Arkansas, the Ozark type lakes. Sometimes I get way up north, you're talking natural lakes in New York State and Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, all those type areas. There's just a lot of rock there. And then the hill country of Texas, you can find it all over the place. In those areas, you have a pretty good selection of rock. And to me, like the big determining factor usually in those is it boils down to structure or the type of rock or when it transitions. So, the structure is the actual, it's no different than grass or anything else. Basically, you have to look at the type of areas, and unless there is a drop there, a creek channel, a quick drop off, a point, a channel bend, a hump, a high spot, a main lake point, a secondary point, something like that, you need some sort of a drop off. Just a continuous flat, something like that, usually is not going to be the deal. So what you're looking for, especially in that colder water, is typically you want that deeper water nearby, and it gets shallower or drops off fast, but you need that depth change. That's always a key driver. Now, what's really good to me is you want to take a few things into account. One is that depth change, that structure. And then the second one is the type of rock. So it could be anything from pea-sized gravel to fist-sized boulders, up to chunk rock, to small boulders, up to actual giant boulders or big rock piles where old glaciers retreated. There's a big pile of rock out there. So that's variable number two. What we have then is you're looking for depth changes, and then you're also studying the size of the rock. The side's important. We'll talk about each of those in a minute. And then the third one, that's an actual transition. So that's transition in depth, and it's also a transition in the rock type. So a couple different things. One, if you have a bluff bank, it's sheer up and down, and it starts to swing out, and all of a sudden it goes from bluff to all of a sudden flatter, where it goes from steep bluff wall to flat. That's a transition. It goes from shallow to deep or steep to kind of flat in a hurry. Another thing is where something transitions, all of a sudden there's a bunch of giant rocks in an area, and then all of a sudden it turns to clay or it turns to gravel or sand. That where it changes there, those are called transition banks. So when you put a couple of those things together, where all of a sudden it's a channel swing, where if this is the bluff wall here and this is the old river channel, and where that river channel comes right up against the shore, then goes back out, those type areas are all of a sudden where it's a bluff, and then all of a sudden it starts to get flatter. And then when you put, all of a sudden the rock changes, you've got big rubbly rock in one spot, and then it goes to gravel, plus have that depth change. The more of those type transitions you get in an area, those are really key. That's what you're looking for. So I'm looking for rock type, that depth change, and I'm looking for those little key areas where transitions. Now, sometimes that can be anything. That might just be really short. It might be go from rock to gravel or clay. That there might be like a 10-foot window there, right down that little transition line. Other times, it's where it's a super steep, bluffy shoreline. It may go for a quarter of a mile to a mile just along this the bank line there. It's a bluff. Then all of a sudden where it ends, and it might be 100 feet on either side of where it goes from bluff up to flatter shore. 200 foot total, 100 feet on both sides of the transition, that can be good. So the transitions can be bigger or smaller. And then the rock type itself, the gravel and stuff, they like to spawn on that. Sand, clay, all those have their fans and little chunk rock and stuff. You'll keep your eyes open when you're fishing, going down the shoreline, and you'll start to notice that looking up on the shore, it's like every time I get bit, I start to get around bigger boulders, or it's more of this reddish rock, or this, more lava looking like black gray rock or limestone or whatever it is. You'll find like a lot of times a similarity. So it's big rock, yellow rock, red rock, gravel, whatever it is. But the other thing is, in general, the more irregular rock that you're getting around. So if you have decent sized boulders, all of a sudden this and bigger, or you get like real crazy lava rock or real craggy type rock with a lot of weird shapes to it, well, to me, that's more like brush. All of a sudden, that's like woody cover, because there's little hiding spots where small prey fish can hide in there, and crawdads and stuff can get in there, and then it makes shade and irregular areas where bass can kind of get in there. The more places where a bass can lurk around there, that to me is better. Trust me, when you're at some really rocky lakes, I mean, if the water's down, it just looks rocky everywhere. It all looks the same. You can't tell the difference. That's where you can just get in a rut and you can just start going down a bank and you're just going and going. You're fishing nothing different. Look for the different things, different types of rock. Try to figure out when you get bit, what exactly you're doing, and look for those changes. Look for something different. It looks like something to hold fish. You really have to force yourself to do that. Otherwise, you're going to fish the same stuff all the time. Now, on a lot of lakes we fish, they're more natural lakes, more clay, and just more barren shorelines. There's not much rock there. Very limited or none. Sometimes there's only man-made rock, like I said, riprap or something. So in those cases, the rock, the way you fish it, is totally different. And let me walk you through those. Now, lakes that don't have much of it, anytime you're talking about limited cover, I always talk about how if a cove has 30 docks in it versus if it has one boat dock on it, the odds that they're going to be on that one lone boat dock, or if there's a barren shore, there's no cover on it, and there's one clump of grass over there, or there's one big laydown tree, that isolated cover is good. Well, rock's the same deal. If you have a mostly kind of sandy, clay sort of bottom lake, but there's one section that has rock, and especially if it's something like the size of my desk here, the size of a car, even the size of a small house or something, you get like a rock outcrop, some old high spot or something, a little point of a maybe next to a creek channel or something, just an old exposed area that has rock on it. Man, those things, when there's not much rock, those things are gold mines. And they don't even have to be on a drop off or anything. You can find these ones that are isolated, and this is where you keep your eyes peeled. You're just idling in and out of places, or if the water's low, say in the fall or winter, and you just look over there and say, oh my God, there's rock all over the place. Another neat deal you can do is get on Google Earth, look in the history. You can look at the years where there's low water. Those rocky areas really stand out. So, a lot of people do that between side imaging, just going around and graphing, or using Google Earth. You can find a lot of these spots, but they're not found in all lakes, and less people fish those. The ones, it takes some scouting to go do it, so they're not getting hammered all the time. And those things can be gold mines. If there's, like I said, if there's not much rock, anytime you find them, anywhere you find them, those can be really good. Now, a couple different things. A lot of times rock, it's like a geological formation, so they'll run in some sort of a pattern. It'll be like a high spot or a ridge, and every time that ridge underwater keeps on coming up, and there'll be a crown or something. So like every hump along a ridge or something, there might be 4 or 5 high spots as this point, a ridge runs out to lake, and every one of those high spots, that'll be a rocky area. And they could be 3 inches below the surface, or they might be 15, 20 feet below the surface. But each one of those high spots, like, oh wow, the tops of these ridges, and then you can look for other areas that are similar. Then other things, you get areas where more up north where there were glaciers, and when the glaciers retreated, they'll leave the moraine, they'll leave piles of rock there. When they melted, you'll get either just random, just out in the middle of like the Great Lakes or in natural lakes up there, there'll just be a spot, just a pile of rocks out there. And you'll notice it in the countryside, in those areas when you're driving through, and all of a sudden you just notice out in a pasture, like, my God, there's a ginormous pile of rock out there. Like it's all cornfield here, and there's one giant rock out in the middle of the pasture over there. Weird. That tells you those lakes around there are probably the same sort of thing, and that's that glacial melt, move these big piles of rock. They push them, grind away, and then all of a sudden they melt and come back and they leave it. And those would typically run in formations as well. So you get lines and stuff. When you find a little bit of that, you start graphing back and forth or throwing your crankbait or something, you'll find like whole rock formations that show up in these natural lakes. And then the other thing, they also push some great big boulders. And when you find an isolated boulder, these things used to be so money. Now with side imaging and Google Earth and stuff, people have found a lot of these. But again, not all of them, and not everybody can fish all the spots all the time. It used to be if you found a lone boulder somewhere, I mean it was like magic. The fish would come running out of there. They were loaded up. There were a bunch there. Now a lot of these lakes get more pressure, but those are the big, the Champlains and stuff, the Great Lakes, they get all the angling pressure. If it's some 50 or 100 acre lake or 2,000 acre lake that don't get not a lot of tournaments on it, not a lot of hardcore fishing pressure, you'll be surprised. There might be a lot of fish on these isolated boulders. Some lakes have a lot of these. Some there might be 2 or 3. But if you're ever idling in, you look over in that clear water and you look down and say, oh my God, there's a giant boulder, or you see it on your graph or something, make a mental note of that. Those lone boulders can be so good. I mean, especially when they're smallmouth, but largemouth too, and spotted bass, they all get around them. Those things are gold mines. And then the other category, some places don't have a lot of rock, or maybe they do have rock, but they have what's called hard spots. And when the whole bottom is just kind of mucky or silted in, areas that get a lot of current coming on them, like the Tennessee River system, all those lakes along there, like the Pickwicks and Kentucky Lakes and Gunnersvilles and stuff. If your lake has current, a lot of times you get shell beds out there, so the mussels and the clams will make, they're kind of like rocks. Those old remains of those make hard spots, or the current just washes on some of those areas. So it's just like small little gravel or a sandy, clean type spot where that functions the same as rock, and it can be a high spot or something. Usually those are points and high spots out towards the current, so they can be fairly shallow. You don't necessarily need electronics, but if you pull a jig across them, you pull a crankbait, you'll just feel bump, 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 bump. It's really rough there. You'll feel it. You know that those are hard spots. So if everything around it is pretty soft and mucky, all of a sudden just a hard, firm bottom, that's enough to hold them. And a lot of times that in the fall, and then, summer too, year round. But anytime you find those isolated hard spots like that, those are money. Guys win in Florida, in the swampy type of lakes where there's no rock around there, but those shell beds and hard spots can be money. Anytime there's current, I'm always looking for hard spots like that. And then some lakes just don't have much rock. I mean, it's just clay and sand. There's not much there, or it's only one section of lake or something. But if it's a man-made reservoir, or if there's people living around it, there's a number of different things. One, riprap, just the concrete and rock that people put on shorelines. Some places around bridges and stuff, that gets down pretty far. So in the colder water months, like a lot of times when you get bridges, those little neck down areas, you get them out the marinas and stuff, especially boat ramps where a lot of tournaments are launched and a lot of fish get released right there. That concrete, that riprap, those can be so good. And then bridges themselves, those can be really good. And then you get the old man-made structures. Now, again, Google Earth is great at finding these. A lot of fishing maps and stuff anymore that are on your phone you can get, on your electronics and stuff. They'll mark old road foundations, old bridges, and house foundations. The roads and stuff, people fish those for years. Those are fairly easy to go out and fish, especially the bridges and the old pipes and tubes and stuff that used to go through the roads, the culverts. A lot of people fish those. But house foundations, a lot of times those are small, and not all of those will be marked. So it'll just be like a slab. So it could be the size of a small room, or somebody's just 10 by 15, 10 by 20 small old garage that was flooded 20 to 100 years ago. Just those small little foundations. It's one little hard spot on everything else is just mucky and not much there. Those foundations can be absolute money. Sometimes the old foundations, you'll see sidewalks, or they had little driveways and stuff. Man, those old things, it's fun to graph around. If you ever see those on them or on Google Earth, find those old foundations. They're worth finding. Those can be super good. Then in terms of baits on these, if it's warmer, if it's 55, 60 and warmer, you can catch them on a lot of stuff. They just get around them. To me, it's less good that time of year, unless I'm throwing a top water like early fall, buzz baits, chopo, walking baits and stuff over those. I can catch pretty good fish on rocks that way. But really, I like it as it gets colder, and that's where there's two baits that really shine: a crankbait or a jig. You know, they get on crawdads a lot, so like the finesse jigs with a crawdad. This is a stank bug, just a craw trailer on the back is my go-to. It's just you just drag this thing around it, up and over the rocks, down the little steep sections, around any cover there that's wood or laydowns that are mixed in. A jig is hard to beat because they're obviously in there eating a lot of crawdads. And then speaking of crawdads and baitfish get in there too. I'm not sure which one they think it is, but they think it's one or the other, obviously, because they eat them. Crankbaits are super good. Like the flat side, I'll throw that Fritz 5 a lot and fish this around it. If I'm actually banging it in like that, I'm banging it into the cover. A lot of times that works out better grinding it. The shallow money badger has the circuit lip. I can fish this really fast and just make a careen off it, kick off. And I can also take like a dime that runs a little bit deeper on deeper rock, and I can just crawl this over. It comes to the rock pretty well. You need crankbaits that are kind of designed for the rock, otherwise they're going to hang up a lot. That's where the dime floats up pretty well, and it comes through it. The money badger with that kick out lip on it, I can truck that through it really fast and just force it to kick out. And then when I want a little more finessey bite, that Fritz side 5 is what I go to. But you can scope around them like I talked about. The boulders would be good. That's almost like a brush pile deal. The guys drop shots, and you can scope fish off those. And there's always going to be fish chasing around. They're suspended, so jerkbaits and Neko rigs, all that will work on scoping. But if I'm just doing more blind casting, crankbait and jig is going to get it done for me. My fall playlist has tons of ideas for catching them in the fall. In my lure videos, you can deep dive on the baits that work year round.